Great. Well, welcome everyone to our 2022 ACSA member caucuses, reporting live here from Santa Fe, New Mexico, Starbucks, De Vargas Mall. I'm very excited about this meeting, getting very close to the end of my presidency. And I want to start off by thanking all of our faculty counselors for all that you do, for being our connection to our membership. Thank you. I want to remind everyone that the business meeting recording is available and it's online. If you attended the conference or the award ceremony in Los Angeles last week, we had some technical difficulties and weren't able to hear from within the space, but everything was recorded, and I would encourage you to go see that recording. I'm going to be turning the meeting over shortly to Sharon Har, our president-elect, who has been doing a wonderful work this year in revising, leading the charge to revise and to rethink our strategic plan. So we'll be hearing from Sharon and then going into breakout rooms and doing some good dialoguing, and then we'll come back. So Sharon, take it away.
I was muted, but now I'm back. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to our spring caucus. It is almost spring in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's not quite sure on a daily basis. So we thought that we would use the bulk of this meeting this evening, afternoon, late morning, depending on where you're sitting, to review where we are with the strategic plan and to receive some feedback on it, but mostly in the form of how we can begin to operationalize and prioritize our work over the next 3 years based on what's going on at individual member schools and their interests and concerns. So what I'm going to do very, very briefly is walk you through the strategic plan, which was passed at our board of directors meeting in Los Angeles about a week and a half ago. Kind of high level walkthrough, I'm not going to read the whole thing, although you're welcome to read along as I'm talking this through. And I'll be kind of focusing, I think, largely on what might be new, or if not new, kind of an expansion of the existing strategic plan, the one that is phasing out as we speak. Know that over the course of the remainder of the spring into summer, we'll be organizing our various strategic priorities in response to what you're about to hear, and also the interests of the planning committee, the executive committee, and also, what you report out perhaps to us. So I think I should also just quickly, for those of you who don't know, our strategic plan operates on a 3-year cycle. And we're completing the current cycle, the current 3-year strategic plan right now. And so, thank you. Mike is going to be changing slides for me. I appreciate that. Thanks. So the opening of our strategic plan involves our mission, vision, core values, and how we lead. I think they're fairly straightforward, and I'll read these out and then point out what's new about what's new in this particular version. Our mission is unchanged from the past 3 years: to lead architectural education and research, as is our vision, to seek to empower faculty and schools to educate increasingly diverse students, expand disciplinary impacts, and create knowledge for the advancement of architecture. And we have 3 core values: equity, social justice, and climate action, teaching and learning, and research, scholarship, and practice. And in the sort of high level aspect of our strategic plan, this is where there's been a change. The first core value used to read simply, I think, equity or equity and inclusion. Based on conversations in the executive committee and the board and a whole host of other people, and largely from the feedback that we received from the survey and the conversation at the town halls that we held in the fall, we've expanded the first core value to embrace really what we mean by equity, which is to produce social justice and climate action as it pertains to the built environment. And then, of course, we lead by demonstrating our value, advancing pedagogy, and serving as the voice of architectural education. So I guess the next slide. So I should mention there are 5 goals in our current strategic plan. There were 5 goals in our past strategic plan. The changes are largely, in terms of the goals themselves, are largely in their ordering and in, I'd say, their specificity. So the first goal is now equity, social justice, and climate action. This is an expansion of a goal that we've been operating under for the past 3 years, and locating that goal at the very top. The goal was equity and inclusion. Again, we've now defined that to embrace social justice and climate action. And we've put it first because we believe that every goal that falls out, every goal underneath it follows equity, social, and climate action, that core goal is embedded in everything that we do. I'd say that this is probably the goal that has changed the most with regard to its objectives. And I'll just say a couple words about what those are. The first change is that we've begun to define what we mean by these terms. And therefore you see kind of large lists of things that come after the verb in each one of these objectives. But it was important to us to clarify what we meant. We've added both climate action to our goal. I think very much in response to our own internal conversations and feedback from our membership with regard to what was missing in past strategic plans. We've also added a level of intersectionality, which is how we all operate today in our teaching and our own research, and it's important to call that out in our goals. And we've also added an interest in pathways both to and from higher education and architecture, both for our students and for faculty, very deliberately and intentionally thinking about how do people find their way into architectural education, where do they go from there, and also not only our students, which was, I think, our primary focus in the past, sort of thinking about how we think about faculty as well. The second goal, which used to be the first, is slightly reworded to research, scholarship, and creative practice, which I think reflects the language that many of our institutions use today. And the changes to the objectives that fall under that goal are the addition of a very specific language about systematic inquiry, how we actually conduct our work, the recognition of the interdisciplinary nature of our work, and an increase in an attention to dissemination, which is something that we've been hearing back from quite a bit of our membership in terms of what the ACSA can and should be doing for our members and various stakeholders. I think it's the next slide. The third major goal of the strategic plan is partnerships, to nurture partnerships with and provide sustained outreach to national and international organizations in architecture and to advance shared agendas. That goal itself is not really changed from the past iteration, but under the, I'd say, underneath the umbrella of partnerships, we've increasingly are aligning the definition of what we mean by partnership to our values as an organization. And we are trying to parallel changes that are kind of occurring within accreditation practice, largely by the NAB, but also other organizations, to focus more, that is focusing the attention of our schools more on assessment and not away from specific checklists of what we actually have to accomplish in our work. And consequently, I think you've already seen, but we'll be continuing to roll out projects and work that align what we do with regard to accreditation, in line with these new kind of concerns around educational assessment. The fourth goal is engagement and support. Again, a goal that has always been there. We've added some language that aligns more strongly with our values around creating equitable opportunities. But there's been a fair amount of change in there. I think not in terms of, if you kind of compare at first glance, it doesn't look like there's a lot of change, but the way in which the language reads under this goal, you can see under the first one, to increase the range of opportunities and reduce impediments for faculty and students to engage with the ACSA. This is really important to us, to basically provide greater access to the work that we do, both as an organization and in terms of the dissemination that comes from us. And also to continue our work with regard to both community colleges, which has already begun, but also non and pre-professional architectural programs. And I could also say that some of this work has really come out of what we've learned from the last 2 years with regard to the concerns of our membership with regard to an enlargement of interest around equity, but also what we've learned about how we can communicate with one another, and what kind of mechanisms we might use for conducting certain portions of our conferences or webinars or other ways of sharing information and getting our work out into the world. So we want to decrease the impediments to being able to engage a kind of broader community. And the fifth, and I think we often as faculty forget the importance of this goal, but I think without this goal, we could not be the ACSA, which is organizational effectiveness and sustainability. You know, this is the work that happens in the background in many respects, but is critical to how we operate. And I'd say we are an extremely lean organization of staff with our financial resources. And we get a lot done with that, but it's critical that our strategic plan call out the need to maintain the organizational structure, governance practices, and funding that ensures our sustainability and growth and to achieve our mission. So this itself is staying the same. But I do want to say that over the past several years, and certainly moving into the next 3 years, the board with the ACSA staff is working very diligently to link the budget with our personnel and our capital resources, and to plan long-term for the stability of our organization. And I'll just shout out to all of our staff and also our secretary treasurer for the incredible work that they have done to ensure that we came out of some of the financial scenarios of the pandemic unscathed. It took a lot of really hard work to make sure that that happened. And even though we're talking about the next 3 years, I would be remiss if I didn't mention what has come before to bring us to the point where we are today. So those are our strategic plan goals and objectives. And I think next slide, Mike. Are we up to the next slide? Yeah. So what we wanted to do today was to break out into discussion sections that'll last approximately 50 minutes or so, maybe a tad longer. that could allow us to discuss these 4 questions that can help inform the planning committee, the finance committee, and the board as a whole, as we kind of put the mechanisms in place to achieve this upcoming strategic plan that goes into effect, I believe, in July, or very soon, momentarily. If not July, September. We have multiple calendars in the ACSA, and I tend to lose track, but it's very soon. So what we want to talk about are 4 things in our breakout sessions, each of which will be led by 1 or more ACSA board members. The first is climate action and social justice. What is happening at your school in the way of new courses or curricula, speaker series, workshops, administrative policies, administrative roles, cluster hires, fellowships, anything else around the questions of climate action and social justice. I realize that both of these, each individually, could be its own conversation, but it's also helpful to pair them, as I think they're very much paired in our mind as well. The second is the focus, another focus over the next several years, which is student pathways into higher education. What is your school doing about K-12 outreach? What are your prospects for developing new outreach programs, including high school, after school, and summer programs? And I suppose I should add in there articulation with community colleges, as that's a conversation we've been having quite a bit lately. What are the expectations and support that you're providing for new architecture students, both graduate and undergraduate? So I think we've all been faced with this as we're now entering back into our classrooms face-to-face in our studios. What do you want to see for students entering design education? What does a student need to know? How are you supporting new students differently? I think we're all doing very different things than we were doing 2.5 years ago. And then I think, although we've called this out as a separate question, I think underlying perhaps all of them is what do you need and how can the ACSA help?
So we're going to report out. We'll just do some, how much time do we have left till the very end, Mike?
18 minutes.
18 minutes. So we're going to do a really fast one. I'll start and I'll just report on my group, and maybe every board member just give us some highlights. We only got to 2 questions, and then the last question, what can ACSA do? Our group represented the states of Tennessee, North Carolina, up Minnesota, Puerto Rico, Hawaii. We were all over the globe. For the first question, climate action and social justice, I asked for a show of hands because I wondered, do all of your schools have at least 3 people that are engaged in climate action in some way? And everyone raised their hand, and that was a positive thing to see. I know back in the day, maybe there was always that one person who did green architecture, and a lot of faculty who were not really engaged. So that was a positive. We heard from schools that are introducing a lot of work through their curricula and through new hires, people who are coming in and who are focusing on LGBTQ issues in Puerto Rico, in North Carolina, faculty who are, it almost sounds like cluster hires. 4 faculty, African-American faculty, were hired there to revise an arts initiative and to see how it impacts pedagogy. So a lot of changes and introductions into the curricula through faculty hires. The second question that we asked was about K-12 outreach. And again, a lot of schools have for quite some time engaged K-12. One theme that came up, and Tom Fisher brought this up, was the fact that maybe in the past we were doing this almost in the realm of the apprenticeship model, but more and more as we're finding that that these programs aren't necessarily recruiting BIPOC students, that we really needed to beef up the mentoring infrastructure that needs to be part of all of these programs, outreach programs, so that students are aided along the way, and sometimes also with financial assistance. And in his school, they did that with partnerships with large corporations. We leapfrogged to the very last question: what can ACSA do? Because I was very interested in hearing about how we can improve the organization. There is still a perception that it's a elite group, a cabal, a group that is maybe hard to penetrate, and that sometimes translates into getting. It's difficult for faculty counselors to even get faculty to vote on issues. So that's, I think, one thing that we have to continue to work on, how to get our membership and our faculty to be more involved. We also heard that sometimes other communities like AIA's knowledge communities are engaging faculty, other groups are engaging faculty. So sometimes we're not maybe collaborating enough with groups that are already producing important knowledge bases that we should intersect with better. And the last one, which I really appreciated, was from Milagros Singoni Philip in Tennessee. And that is that maybe we need to also target specific groups a little bit more, specifically tenure track faculty who often aren't comfortable writing and preparing for tenure cases, writing grants. So maybe ACSA can do a better job, or really just expand its palette of webinars to focus a little bit more on how they can help subgroups. That was one group. Another group that was brought to our attention, Joanna Lombard at the University of Miami, Ohio, mentioned that the Dark Matters University work that ACSA did was really helpful because it almost mainstreamed topics so that she felt she could share that with her faculty, and it wasn't seen as the work of just one particular faculty member. So we can act as conveners and bring folks together to kind of embrace topics that we can mainstream. So that's mine. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon. Sharon, tell us about your group.
My group. Well, I really enjoyed my group because there were a number of people in it, in addition to the people I knew who I always enjoy, some other folks that I got to know a little bit more that I've never met. And so welcome to the conversation. We looked at the first 3 questions with a kind of underlying theme, perhaps, of what do you need, how can ACSA help? Kind of reading through all of them. One of the things I think we've discovered is that there are a lot of things happening at schools. And one thing that I might share out from this is that we need to kind of share that information more productively across all of our membership. So for instance, we've certainly heard about a number of hiring initiatives, but also ways of organizing searches, changing the rubrics of for how we recruit and assess faculty coming in through searches. How we, though, also have to change our institutions and what we teach to both with regard to communities, with regard to social justice, certainly with regard to climate action, to attract the kinds of faculty that are interested in those concerns and might not have historically found their way into our schools, but similarly with the students as well. So we spoke a little bit about changes that might need to happen to within the really broad number of K through 12 programming that we all do. We talked about how kind of difficult it is to do that program. It's expensive. It requires certain kinds of skill sets that the typical architecture faculty member might not always have. And that it also requires kind of partnerships both with high school, with school districts, but also with communities and with the AIA, that there needs to be a kind of connected conversation across all of those initiatives. We talked quite a bit, and I think it was an interesting conversation with regard to the need not only to recruit students and faculty, but also to retain them. And perhaps the need for the ACSA to engage some feedback from those institutions. We heard about some really interesting work at University of Hartford with regard to that. What can we do to ensure that we not only bring in students and new faculty, but that they become important parts of our universities and stay with us. Always the importance of kind of mentoring at all levels, and I think there'll be quite a bit of emailing going back and forth among the various members of our group.
Thank you, Sharon. Team Jeff Day.
Martha was our note taker. Martha, would you want to?
Martha is
Yeah.
our public member, and we love her. She just joined us. She's fantastic.
Okay, so I think we got through quite a few questions. We discussed obviously climate action at various schools, and a few themes that came out were everything from, well, not just climate action, but social equity as well, was how sort of baked in it was into the program fundamentally. So Julie, who's at Texas Tech, said that they've been sort of designated as a Hispanic institution, so serving like a predominantly Hispanic population, and so that is fundamentally baked into programming at that university. And she also articulated that it sort of really also bubbles up from the bottom. So with students who came in at the undergraduate level, going all the way to becoming her peers and colleagues, and they work a lot with NOMAS as well, in incorporating programming that NOMAS thinks would be important. So that was kind of one model of how it's sort of fundamentally baked in from an equity perspective. Luis also talked about really creating space for, for a studio-like structure within the school. They have 7 different departments, and it's a mechanism for allowing all the different departments to sort of come together around specific topics, which are oriented towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's what they use as a benchmark for their activities, and they're getting ready to create a website to really sort of show their progress and publish their progress along those benchmarks. And he felt like that was a really kind of exciting and organic way to have this cross-pollination happening across different disciplines. Beth shared some pretty inspiring stuff around a book that I think is also maybe creating a zeitgeist during our time, which is Ministry for the Future. It is a dystopian science fiction novel written by a scientist that basically shows what the future could look like in a very extreme and hot world. And she said this has had a really big impact on not only the discussion within their program, but sort of the sense of despair amongst the students. And so the big question is, how do we prepare students for managing that despair as they go into the private sector, and how disjointed that transition is from being in this sort of, I don't want to call it the ivory tower in a negative way. And it's a positive thing where you're actually thinking about big ideas and kind of expansive thinking. And then you kind of get, put into the little, what is it, square peg in a round hole, right? Where you have to go to work and you're basically doing detailing on on projects where it's like, this is what the code requires and what happened to all those amazing, beautiful things we were talking about at school. And so Beth, please feel free to jump in if I'm incorrectly summarizing your contributions to the conversation. But I think that was a really big part of the discussion, is how do we manage that despair and empower students to be able to handle that transition and to be change agents within those organizations. So we pivoted from there and talked about, I feel like I'm not being very succinct. Let me try and be a little bit more precise. Is there someone permanently staffed to teach these skills to students? A theme that came out across our discussion was, yes, there are staff that know about green design. There are limitations to what the curriculum actually will allow around that, as well as this tension between, if we go too deep on one subject matter area, it's at the expense of another. So it was raised that this might be an area for discussion around how do we infuse more of these topics around social justice and climate change mitigation into the curriculum in a way that is still in line with the accreditation requirements of the programs. And then this idea of, there being like a gradient of staff, or not staff, faculty and students' interests in this. But at the end of the day, many of these topics resonate with the students, but how do we prevent it from feeling ideological and really producing something that ends up being, creating a very rich sort of design output, as opposed to feeling ideological, was mentioned. And then lastly, some programs feel like they actually don't have the engineering capacity, like the expertise in-house, and how do you sort of bridge that gap when you don't have that within your program. Are schools running any programs to address students that may not be able to afford the education? I think this kind of boiled down to just, scholarships and being able to provide free tuition for students in need. Although right now it was flagged that those resources tend to go to high performing students. So if you are dealing with students from a disadvantaged background who aren't high performing, how do we bring them in and provide them with the support they need to try and get up to speed with those high performers? Luis even mentioned, in some instances, if you're born in the wrong zip code, you just don't have access to the courses that are required as a prerequisite. And there's not really a correlation necessarily in the long run between, your ability to perform in those prerequisites and then sort of long-term performance. And so how do we sort of balance that dynamic? Although Maureen did flag, and I'm sorry if I'm naming people, I shouldn't do that. Some folks flagged that there is this tension between how do you actually select students if we're not requiring a portfolio, we're not requiring test scores, and everyone sort of looks the same on paper. It's very, very hard to select students. And so there is some need for differentiation and for showing an interest or an inclination towards the subject that we need to figure out in a way that's fair. And then what are we seeing as students enter design education? What do students need to know? I guess that I'm going to go with kind of what's top of mind for me. The thing that percolated up from that conversation is this idea of sort of the historic culture within this industry of, like, I can't remember how it was framed, more of like an extractive approach to, kind of sweatshop labor from, students coming into the professional world, and also sort of like subjecting them to that experience even during like the studio phase of their work, coursework, and that there's kind of a real movement and pushback against it, even like some discussion around unionization of students, given the pandemic and this focus on mental health and having to create boundaries around work versus taking care of yourself. And how does this community of the faculty community who basically was subject to that type of treatment start to reflect on what was unhealthy about that, and is there a way to create a new culture and boundaries without compromising sort of that ability to perform and learn the skills that are are needed and required to be successful in this field.
Great,
So,
Martha, I'm going to jump to the
Cut me off.
last group, just
Okay.
the interest of time.
yeah, sorry.
I believe the last group is Team Shannon DeFranza. Is that true?
That was our group as
Oh,
well.
I meant to say Team Gundel Approach.
Yes, we had a diverse group as well, with participants from the UK and Canada.
Wow.
And so we started with climate action and social justice activities in the different schools, and then ended on pathways and community college questions. But the range of the strategies and changes were really wide, from successful programs for more diverse hires, to a survey run for students to get their feedback on how successful they think their education and sustainability is, combined with some awareness raising activities like a poster competition, oscillating with all students in Canada and international audience. So that was really interesting. Then Oxford Brookes, the university in the UK, had a slightly different profile of students, and their main initiative on social justice is decolonizing their curriculum, because they have many Southeast Asian students. And so this was a really interesting discussion, combined with their awareness of neurodiversity, so issues around any mental health issues that student might have, and how the school approaches it with college, and how this also often conflicts with their cultural background to be able to receive help and so on. So that was a really interesting, very rarely discussed topic that we engaged in. Our participant, as a very long time faculty of an HBCU, shared with us that this year, his first year class, is the first he experienced really asking for social justice discussion, which was for him very astonishing. But he shared also a lot of the difficulties of this incoming student body having no peers, because those had been all taught online. So a lot of struggle, but also really interesting changes in the student body he knows really well. And then from Texas A&M, we learned about a really interesting project with another close by college. Texas A&M is predominantly white, and the partner institution is predominantly Black. And so they're working on a Juneteenth museum in Galveston, and really played this diverse set of partners, bringing in knowledge for the white faculty and student body, and generating community support around this important topic. So there was a lot of discussion how this affected the school, but it was very interesting to hear. And I think this is sort of the big overarching climate change and social justice. And pathways for students, again, ranged from interesting concepts or programs a university had developed to get students interested in doctoral research, or doctoral programs, actually, with 4 years of funding. So taking out the issue K through 12 models, how to integrate students right away when they start their elementary education. What else did we have here? Yeah, the HBCU had a new program with more intense ability to provide internships, and so hopefully a better transition into practice. So that sounded also very promising. I think. Oh yeah, and then we ended up at the community college level discussion. And I think 3 out of 6 or 7 participants had a lot of experience in how to do this, navigating the ability to transfer credits. I think that was, besides the different tuition levels and so on, but most of it hinged around what can the colleges do to accept all credits, and what can the community college do to prepare the students to have that better transition.
Gundula, I think we're going to end there because we're at the end of our meeting. I want to thank everyone who participated today. This is all very useful information, and I would ask that you please send notes to Sharon. We are looking at our revised strategic plan. Still we voted on it, but this is going to be helpful as we begin to think about actions and work this next coming year. I want to remind everyone of our virtual conference, the second half of the annual conference, which is virtual, and these are all our paper sessions, and that's May 18th through 20th. And I also hope to see some of you this summer, July 6th and 8th in Brooklyn, New York. We'll be at Pratt Institute for the Teacher Summit. If you haven't registered for that, please do so. I think we're going to have a blast in New York. So thank you all again for joining us, and good night. Appreciate all of the dialogue. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Carol.